The bright stars twinkled at me from the dark night sky as I took a nightly walk to ease my mind. There was something about the night that always drew me closer. A dark temptation to explore the cold and empty town, only lit by dim streetlights. The dark sky a veil to cover my mistakes. I live in a remote town in Western Australia. It's a small town with a population of roughly 1,700. Growing up, I'd become familiar with everyone in the town, and everyone knew who I was. This is what drew me to taking walks at night. There was no one around to judge me, to pity me, as I aimlessly walked those streets and dreamed of a better life. So, remember how I mentioned it's a small town? This means that I know every single street and road like the back of my hand. So, when I came across a dark windowless building at the corner of the street, chills ran up my spine. The building was new, and definitely didn't exist because I had been around that place earlier that day, and it was simply an empty lot. I slowly walked towards the building and stared at it. It was a colossal building, and was at least several stories high. I wondered if I was dreaming, but the environment around me was too real for a dream. This was definitely real life, and I was in front of a building that didn't exist. The front of the building was painted black to match the night, and was featureless except for large, opaque glass sliding doors at the front. An indescribable feeling of pure need to enter the building overcame my body as soon as I noticed the doors. The building seemed to have a strong magnetic pull on my mind, and before I knew it, my legs had started to move to walk me to the entrance. As I reached a certain proximity of the entrance, a light above the door lit up and illuminated a sign engraved into the smooth wall. The Focus Chamber. Reading that name exponentially increased the pull and allure of this building, and I gave in to this feeling as I walked forward. The sliding doors opened automatically, and the building welcomed me with open arms. I walked into a reception room. There was no one at the table, and beyond the reception table was a luxurious lounge, with large welcoming armchairs and an array of expensive shelves housing various books. The furniture's expensive and luxurious appearance in combination with the perfect arrangement of the furniture itself exuded a welcoming warmth. A warmth that I hadn't felt within me for the past few years. I walked past the reception desk and into the expansive lounge to take a seat in one of the armchairs. As soon as I sunk into the most comfortable cushions I've ever sat on in my life, a drowsy sensation took over me, and my eyelids began to droop. I didn't even notice it as I fell asleep. I awoke from a dreamless sleep on the same armchair I had fallen asleep on. The reception was still empty. I retrieved my phone from my pocket to check the time and noticed that it would not turn on. I held the power button for so long that my thumb began to hurt from the material digging into my skin. But the phone would not turn on. It had probably died. There was no charger on me, and there didn't appear to be any sort of outlet anywhere in this place. So I was about to leave when I noticed another doorway in the lounge room. It pulled at me once more, and I was helpless as I walked towards the doorway. What had once been a sense of calmness and submission as I had let the building pull me inside was now raw fear as I began to realize that I had lost all control of my body. I was a captive of my body, and the building had assumed control of every single muscle. On the other side of the doorway was a mixture of a cafeteria and kitchen area. Every single food preparation machine was arranged on a large counter made of expensive marble. Large glass refrigerators and freezers held all sorts of food on the other side of the room. In the center of the room was an arrangement of large dining tables. It was apparent this was some sort of food area. At the very end of the room was yet another doorway, except this one had a sign engraved at the top that stated, The focus chamber. I walked inside, voluntarily this time, as I was genuinely curious as to what was inside this room. It was named at the entrance of the building as well, so it was probably the main purpose of this building. Everything in this room was pure white. The walls, the ceiling, and the floor were completely spotless, and the only piece of furniture in the room was a table and a chair. It felt like being in an imaginary, artificial space because of the sheer whiteness of everything. Then, on the wall to my left, was a large mirror that filled me with dread the moment I spotted it. I couldn't even spend a few more minutes there, because the white color of everything was just overwhelming. It wasn't a pleasant shade of creamy white either. No, it was a stark, cold white. One that's similar to the harsh blue light from a screen at 3 a.m. I turned around and noticed that the doorway had disappeared, and was instead replaced with wall. In panic, I beat my fist against the wall, but it was futile. I was stuck in a room that started to seem more like a solitary confinement chamber than a focus chamber. I also realized that the room was very soundproof. The silence was absolutely deafening. I could literally hear my own organs working. The squelch of my stomach and intestines ever so slightly shifting made me sick as I stepped back from the wall and walked around the room. I made my way to the table and chair to take a seat. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I was starting to feel claustrophobic. Yet, at the same time, I felt vulnerable and exposed in this room. On the table was a sheet of paper, and besides it was a black pen. The paper read, "This is your focus chamber. Focus, and you will find a way out." I picked up the black pen and started to scribble all over the walls, yet the ink seemed to absorb into those pristine white walls and leave no stains at all. I instead started to abuse the piece of paper and scribbled all over it. Minutes morphed into hours, and it started to feel like I had been in that room for days. Every single sound from my own body echoed in my skull like a loud bell. I got so bored that I started to count my heartbeats. My eyes wanted to see anything but white, and as my stimulation-deprived mind desperately tried to entertain itself, I began to hallucinate. It started with the mirror that I had been avoiding in that room for so long. I stared right at it and felt as if my reflection was looking right back at me. It smiled at me. I clawed my hands at my face to feel my mouth and noticed I was not smiling. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as my reflection produced a very familiar syringe out of its pocket and began to stab it repeatedly into its stomach. I felt every single stab. It felt like my entire abdomen was on fire. I could feel all the pain I had put my body through in the past 5 years, all in a single moment. And then, a flurry of memories, one after another, flashed in my mind's eye. Except those memories enlarged, like I was inside them. I watched my younger self take drugs for the first time. It was minor at first, just a smoke here and there. As the years passed, I took harder, stronger drugs. I was soon injecting myself with things I had bought from dealers for $5. And they ate my body from the inside out. What I had been keeping from myself burst like a dam at capacity. All those repressed feelings of self-hate and guilt flooded my mind as I watched my younger self make mistake after mistake. It was a nightmare. My life was a nightmare. I was reliving every single moment since my youth and was starting to see where I had fallen. My mind went to the piece of paper on the table. I needed to focus. That's right, I needed to focus. And so I focused. Those fleeting memories sharpened, became more vivid. At first, I thought I had just worsened my agony, but my memories started to go in fast forward. Those years of suffering and pain flew past in seconds, and I had a vision of me walking outside of the focus chamber. This wasn't right. It wasn't a memory anymore. This instinctive feeling led me to believe what I was watching was now the future. I watched as I ruined my life and eventually died of an overdose the following year. I could feel my body die as I lived in that moment. Everyone eyed me with pity as I was wheeled into the hospital, already half dead. My broken, abused body eventually gave out, and I could feel every breath being sucked out of me until I was no more. I opened my eyes and found myself right in front of the mirror. I had moved far from where I was sitting initially, and was facing my reflection, which was laughing. I could hear its laughter, a laugh full of malice and anger. And then it lunged forward. The glass seemed to ripple as it reached its hand out and grabbed me by my throat. It pulled hard and I crashed face first into the mirror. It continued to pull, and I started to hear the glass begin to crack as my body pushed harder and harder against it. Soon, the glass was beginning to collapse and shards dug into my skin as my reflection continued to pull. First, my face went through to the other side, and then my torso followed. My reflection grabbed the syringe it had earlier and aimed it at my eye. In a moment of pure desperation, I curled my hand into a fist and punched my reflection with full force in the face. Its grip on my neck loosened, and I had a window of opportunity to pull myself back into the focus chamber. My reflection followed back and pushed through the glass itself this time. It stuck its hand out into the focus chamber before the entire mirror collapsed, and my reflection completely disappeared. The hand that had made it out of the mirror collapsed onto the floor, now disembodied. At the same time, the walls of the focus chamber started to get stained with a deep black. I turned back and realized that the door had appeared again and was open. I ran out into the cool night. The focus chamber had given me another chance, and I wasn't about to lose it.